for joining. It looks like you've already come on and given me a thumbs up, so thank you for that. I am actually going through a big moment of grief today. Um, it's it's very weird. There's a lot of polarity that happens in my life, and I don't know if you guys experience it the same as well. So let's get into that. But first, let's do some introductions. This is the Scholastic Intelligence podcast. I am your host, Amelie, and I am the Chief Embodiment Officer of Scholastic Intelligence. Scholastic Intelligence is transforming as we speak. I'm in a huge rebirth cycle as we speak. And that's why I'm bringing forward the issue of the shadow of death, which is Psalm 23 4. I know I've been very emotional, and feisty is one of those. So I do want to say thank you. So good to see you, Mike. I want to say thank you to everybody that comes on and watches my streams and hears my voice, and the people like Mike and some of my the McKinney sisters that come on, and the McKinney mother Deborah, who comes on and supports me and thumbs up the video and really participates. Thank you, Tyler, for always coming in. I appreciate that. It means that my voice is being heard, and not that I have to have anybody hear it. It's not from a place of ego. This is from a place of healing. When I speak, it is my own internal rage coming out, even though it doesn't sound very rageful. It is a way that I can process the anger that I have in my grief process. So we all know that the grief process starts with denial, and then it moves to anger, and then it moves to trying to reconcile. What's the word? Trying to reconcile, and then accepting. And there's all of these feelings that happen when you go through a grief cycle. And right now I'm just initiating as a grief priestess, meaning that I am going deep into what it feels like to have grief. And then also the initiation is being reborn after the grief. And it's not something that, we'll get into what grief is. It's not something that it just goes away and we just like, okay, now we don't have to deal with grief. It's something that you learn how to move with. If you've ever lost a loved one, particularly close one, so it could be, your siblings, it could be your parents, it could be your grandparents, anybody that you're close to, if you've ever had loss at that level, you know that it's very, very, like a lot of people have a very difficult time moving through that because they don't know how to move. They think that they just experience all the things and then like, okay, now I don't grieve anymore. When in reality, it's parts becomes a part of your identity. And then in that grief, as you're moving through that, you move with it instead of trying to force it out of your own personal identity. Okay, so we're going to be going pretty deep into into that. Let me pull up the psalm that it's really based on. So just to be really transparent with you guys, my my uncle, I think I have mentioned it, got into a very severe car accident at the beginning of June, and he's been in ICU, and they tried to discharge him, but then he went back into ICU again, into the trauma unit. He had a whole list of very severe injuries, both physically, internally with the organs, and up to and including in his brain. And I got some really difficult news today that the interventions that they've been using are actually causing a little bit more harm in his body than they are in that they are helping. And so if I have to pop off early, I don't want to take a long time today because I am waiting on more calls. But in in dealing with that, in dealing with that situation, it's a lot of responsibility. It brings up a lot of grief from me, basically kind of death dueling my mother through her death process. And so it gives me a very sharp perspective on what people are dealing with when they go through grief. And everybody is going to go through grief or has gone through grief, or even 3NA, thank you, welcome. Um, everybody has gone through grief in some form or likeness. And even more still, as I'm going through this process, there's huge things rebirthing. I'm essentially the catalyst that is going to change culture, that is going to shift our culture from being in this really disgusting, toxic environment to providing a solution to ease the pain. And so when I say that I go through a polarity, it is a very sharp, very real, very visceral polarity. When I was going through the grief of my mother, there was so many people that said, stay strong, or keep staying strong. And they'll say that to you. And I am strong. But sometimes you have to let go of being strong and be soft and cry and feel the feelings of grief. And so when I say that I'm like having this grief priestess initiation in this last couple years, like I am very serious about it. It's a very serious initiation. So let's get into the material. So we're going to be talking about grief today. We're going to be talking about what it's like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And it doesn't have to be death. This could be, things that you're worried about, things like the wolves are at the door. But let's read the psalm. So the psalm goes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in the green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil," which I did today. "My cup runneth over. For surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So this came into me today. and it was all kind of sparked from this bad news that I got. It's a very serious situation. And so when we talk about, let's kind of set the stage, like now that we have this, this psalm that has inspired the message here, I want to talk about like what it's like to be in that valley. Now, it's interesting because I have a really high propensity to be very positive. And it's interesting in holding the strength of positivity, even in the face of all of these things that might set back people. As a challenge, I kind of put all of my stressors of the things that I've gone through in the last year, the things that I've gone through in the last 5 years, the things that are currently, on my table of things that I need to address. I've gone through all of that. I listed it all out and I put it into ChatGPT, and I was like, these are all the things that I've gone through. And it's the response was, wow, that would have broken anybody that wasn't strong. So nobody can say that Amelie is not strong, because I am very strong. I can handle a lot. But there is a limit. You've got to know what you're putting in your cup and what you're pouring out. And you want to have your cup filled at all times, or have the light or the oil within yourself at all times as well. So the reason why I bring up the valley of the shadow of death is that it's it's inviting this element of grief as an initiation. It's not anything that you like. I don't want to move. I don't want to walk through the valley. And a lot of people do that. They avoid walking through the valley, and then, at some point they're going to have to get themselves initiated through that valley, or, you know, kind of suffer the shadow of death if they don't. Like, we all need to address death. And it's such an interesting thing. Like, we have this really disconnected relationship with death. I don't know, like, where it really stems from. I think that a big part of it, and I will just make a claim, and allegedly could it be, maybe I won't make a claim. I'll say allegedly could it be that the the ideals that we have around death come from the programming from religious institutions that say, do this or else, and if you don't do this, your soul is going to hell. So your soul is going to die if you don't do this. And for some reason, we've programmed that into our minds that that is that death and grief and, everything associated with loss is now a form of punishment, when it really isn't punishment. Death is a rite of passage. Grief is a rite of passage. These are things that we get initiated into as we exist in our current forms. So once we take death, once we take grief, once we take loss as a rite of passage, we'll recognize that new things get reborn from that. Okay, so we're looking at the cyclical nature of our lives when we look at what the rite of passage of death is. So I know I say grief priestess, and maybe that doesn't make any sense to you, but grief priestess to me is someone who walks others through loss. So right now, in my own personal initiations of dealing with the death of my father, the death of my mother, the death of all of my, grandparents, the death of a close friend's brother this year, and now potentially the death of my uncle, who I was very close to, I've experienced quite a bit of loss. And so I'm helping to walk you through it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Death does not mean death of the soul. Those lies, those fear tactics and fear campaigns of, if you don't get saved, you're going to go to hell, those are stories that were created that are not true. Those are not true, but it's embedded in us. I had to move it out of me last week, of relieving myself of, if I'm not saved, then I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'm not chosen, I'm not important, I don't have, anything that I do is not going to matter. When in all actuality, every one of us matters. Every one of us has a unique, beautiful purpose and a unique, beautiful mission that we get to come here and be in these wonderful bodies that are so complex and yet simple. But the technology that we have in our bodies is amazing. And the fact that we're here on this planet interacting with others is a miracle. And we miss that because that message is not getting sent out. And if it is, a lot of people will, kind of crap on it and say that that's not important, that's not how to live, that's not this, that's not that, okay? So, as a grief priestess, as I'm walking you through your own initiation of how to deal with loss, where it is this interesting experience of being between life and death. And this doesn't have to be, you lost people in your family. This could be loss of your own identity and not being connected to that. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can look at grief, that you can look at loss. So we're going to be holding ourselves in the threshold of life and death and really what that looks like, instead of just embracing life and being super excited about it, which is great. Like, yes, we want to embrace life, we want to love life. However, we also need to know how to embrace death as well. We need to have this harmony within ourselves of being able to go back and forth and flow between the great achievements and then the great losses of our lives. So as a grief priestess, there's also this energy of being, particularly for me, this, I call it death doula, or maybe a midwife of endings, where, as we're ending things that we don't want anymore, or maybe as we're addressing those close loved ones where their lives are ending in death, we're, as a grief priestess, I am helping to midwife the death. But it also is this midwifery of rebirth. So, in my experience in losing my mother, and if I get emotional, it's completely normal. But in my experience of losing my mother, I had to pick up this wand of matriarchal leadership, because it was passed from my mother to me. And so now, me, in my rite of passage of being a matriarchal figure in my family, that rebirth came out of that. And there was a lot of initiation that came from that. There was some generational trauma I had to clear, of codependency, of, working and not being in touch with my emotional state, of avoiding my emotional state, of silencing myself, of censoring myself, of being palatable because of fear of being too much, fear of being seen. So those things I learned as I, was grieving the loss of my mother. And yeah, it still makes me emotional. It's still like it's only been, a year and a half. And so it's not a long time at all. Like, she was with me for 40 years of my life. Well, 41, I guess, if you count being in the belly or whatever. And I was her first daughter. I was her first child. So as the grief priestess, as I show you, it's okay to grieve the loss of things. It's okay to experience loss. It's okay to experience grief. It's okay to experience death. And it's nothing to be terrified of. It's not a punishment, which are actual thoughts that came into my head. When my uncle initially went into the hospital and I'm sitting there with him in the hospital, my immediate thought, this story pops into my head of people that are around me, that are close to me, die. They die. And it's it's a weird thing to experience. I'm not the Grim Reaper, the Death Reaper or whatever. I'm not the Death Reaper. I'm not the Grim Reaper or whatever that word is. I merely have been presented in this life, in my soul contract of learning how to move through this painful and often dismissed process. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we have tons and tons of, parents and grandparents that live in nursing homes. And a lot of people just, they don't even go visit them. They just put them in there and then, kind of wait around until they die. And then, whatever dysregulation that comes out of that erupts afterwards. And they're, working on trying to figure out how to distribute the assets if there isn't, there's all kinds of things like setting up a memorial, setting up how they're going to be, serviced after life. So as a grief priestess, as I'm sharing this information with you, I want to illustrate that this doesn't have to be literal. This could be symbolic death. And a lot of us are afraid of loss. Right now, I'm writing a book called The $8 Truth Exposing a $380 billion Lie. And it's huge. It's the solution to fix this systemic problem that we have in our world right now. And I realize that in delivering this information to the people in the fashion that I'm going to do it, like I'm starting a grassroots campaign to declare fair treatment in the workplace. Okay? What does that mean? That means symbolically, I'm addressing the toxic work environments in all industries. It doesn't have to be a commerce industry. This could be in education. It could be in health. Like anywhere that there is people that show up to work, I'm addressing the pain points that us as a culture are experiencing. And if you guys have been following my work on the digital age, you'll know that I've been deep diving into some interesting territory that give me a lens of exposure that not very many people are looking at. And because I'm a grief priestess, because I understand walking through this threshold of symbolic life and death, I understand at the other side of when I start this campaign that things are going to systematically change. People are going to be very discomforted. They're going to scream. They're going to gnash their teeth. They're going to be upset because initially there's this moment of feeling of denial. And it's like, how long can you hold that denial? Are you going to stay in that denial, or are you going to move on to the next one of anger, and then being able to coherently express that anger? And then bargaining, that was the other one that I was thinking of. And then bargaining. That method is not going to work. That method, blah, blah, blah. You don't have credentials. You don't have, a scientific background. You don't have this. You don't have that. Like a lot of people are going to come at me. And I understand that. But I have to frame it as, I see you. I'm regulated. I see you. You look like Felix from Stray Kids. I don't know who that is. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, Brooklyn Potato. I like your name, though. That sounds cool. I like potatoes. Potatoes have a great root energy. Okay. So in my exposure of fighting a toxic workplace culture and offering a solution, like I already see the map. I already see the systemic reaction to what is going to happen. So you guys are getting kind of a sneak peek of what I've been working on. It's huge. Like my body has been transmuting tons of stuff. Burnout, discrimination, harassment, bullying, blame culture, authoritarian control mechanisms in the workplace. Like these are a few things that I'm exposing because I've seen it, I've lived it, and I don't want it to happen anymore. And I'm using my voice as a method to deliver that information to you. Okay? I'm midwifing a huge systemic order culture and offering a solution in its place as a new order where the employee is respected, deeply respected from an earnest, authentic place from their leadership. Okay? So not only am I dealing with, this real life tragedy, and it hurts, but I am also rebirthing a solution for the collective. Okay, so understanding the shadow of death. The shadow of death is not necessarily death itself. The shadow of death is merely the shadow of it, right? So it's this in-between space, this liminal space, if you're peering at it from this mystical lens, it's this in-between space. It's not yet death and it's not yet life. It's like the transition period. So if you think about, the birth of a child, there's a transition period called labor. So we could call it labor. There's this from life to death, the transition between that liminal space. That is the shadow of death. And this can be where identities can dissolve and then new ones are formed as well. Okay? But that in-between space, what happened to oh, I moved the bear. I moved my bear. I was feeling a little, I don't know, feeling a little movie. He's still up here. Felt like it needed, I felt like my room needed to be cleaned a little bit more. I wanted it to look fresher. So I did move some things around. So, as we're looking at this liminal space where your identity dissolves, maybe where part of your ego has to die, and then new things can be born out of it. So, if you look at your life and you're like, man, I've changed so much since I was a teenager. I've changed so much since I was a young adult. And it's because you've gone through some transitions which operated within this valley, this shadow of death perspective, this liminal space. So the shadow of death is not the enemy, okay? The shadow of death is, the shadow is like this unmet, this unhealed, and maybe even an ungrieved place. And you can stay stuck in this valley, this shadow of death, okay? Cosmico, hello from Italy. Oh my gosh, cool. I was I was daydreaming yesterday. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I get to go to Italy soon. I've been kind of being really silly and going on this book tour in my mind, which is really fun and exciting. So thank you for joining. So the unmet, the unheld, the ungrieved places that you can sit in the shadow of death, you can sit there for quite some time. So if you're not grieving like the passing of a loved one, you might be sitting in the shadow of death as we speak. And it's not, time is not linear. So it's like waiting for you to like pass that on through of, okay, now address it. Now do the integration. Now let it go. Now process it out. Manifest it. I'm manifesting it. You guys, I'm going to, the things I'm manifesting right now, my body is just like, oh my gosh. My body, I can feel my body preparing a space for it. And that's what the Grief Priestess is I'm demonstrating to you guys right now ways that you can take even small things like the loss of a job or, the loss of a relationship, or the loss of an identity. So a lot of people don't even think about it, but as we get older and our children start aging, they leave. Like once that youngest child is like so close to it, you start to have this grief of identity of what am I going to be when they move out of the house and now I'm not responsible for them anymore. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And I face that quite often, and that's why I can speak from a place of knowing that identities shift and change. And we don't think about it. Like getting a new job, losing a job, quitting a job, losing a friendship, gaining a friendship. Like these are all shifts in our identities that constantly happen within our lives, and we don't even really consciously recognize it as that. But every time there's a change, there's this small part of your identity that does go through this shadow of death process, that does shift, that dissolves. So now instead of being a mother with their child in the home, now I'm a mother with both of my children have left the nest, right? And that will shift my identity. It shifts where I can go. It shifts how I react. Even having children move from infant to toddler, that shifts you as a parent. From toddler to, child, that shifts you as a parent. From child to teenager, that shifts you as a parent. Like your identity changes as time moves on. So the shadow, while you can sit in the shadow, and as you're processing, that's really what the psalm is telling you. Like, I will fear no evil. I know that in my life, I am going to be surrounded by the shadow of death, but I'm protected. I'm I don't need to fear. I'm comforted. I am cared for. I'm laying beside the still waters. I'm protected. Really what this saying is, there's no verbiage of run away, get the F out of that valley. Shadow of death is around you. That's not what's being said here. What's being said here is I'm regulated. I'm okay. I'm protected by things that are protecting me from the shadow of death. And as I walk through it, as I walk with death, the shadow of it, I'm not going to fear anything. Because if you're fearing, you're in a dysregulated state. You're not going to be feeling comforted. You're not going to be feeling safe. You're not going to be feeling like any of those things. You're not going to be feeling good. You're going to be worried, anxious. Uzan, hello. Um, so you're not meant to run away from it or not even walk through it. Okay, we have to walk through it. We have to move. And as we walk through it, we understand that that shadow is not the enemy. We don't have to be afraid of death. I think okay, this is going from memory, but the saying is like, don't fear those that can kill the body, but fear that which kills the soul. So if you are fearing death of your body, that's one thing that you've got to move through. I remember as a child, I was always worried about, oh my God, I don't want to die. Just this fear of, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And as I got older and, as I got my life experiences, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with that death process. I don't I'm detached from the need to hold on to things in this realm. Like, I'm here to do a mission, and I'm going to serve as best as I can in that mission. And my mission is big. And your mission, may not be as ambitious or large as mine, but you have one. You have a mission. There's the parable of the talents where, there's three servants and they were each given talents. One talent, one 5 talents, and one 10 talents, let's say. And so they were to go out and multiply whatever their talents were. So if you came and maybe you only hold one talent, that's a great, awesome. Multiply it. Okay? If you came here and you have 5 talents, multiply it. Okay? The wickedness came from those that hid their talents because of fear. I was afraid to lose those talents. I was afraid to go out and take a risk. I was afraid. I could even say that I was afraid of being seen, of being visible, of being heard. But I have to cast out that fear because I don't have anything to be afraid of. So let's look at what grief actually is. So grief is like love without a home. Grief is also like, and we have little micro grieving process, and we have macro grieving processes. So I would call a macro grieving process like the transition from being a parent taking care of an infant to a parent taking care of a toddler. That's a micro grief process. And you hear it in people's voices. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how much he's grown up. I can't believe this. They grow up so fast. I miss it when, they were babbling and now they're just like getting into everything. And it changed me as a parent. And I love it, but also I miss those moments of caring for an infant. Okay? So when we look at grief, it really is this sacred rewiring of finding meaning into what we've lost. And a parent does it in a great way, right? I really loved being a parent of a newborn baby, even though it was so tiring and I was always exhausted, but there were so many beautiful moments. Look at all the pictures that we have, and like it was just so beautiful being the one to care for this beautiful child that we have. I do it all the time. I got a picture of my son and I was like, oh my gosh. Or I'll watch videos. I'm like, I remember him talking that way. And now, like, he's a teenager and his voice has dropped like 5 octaves, right? It's just like this low voice. I'm like, who are you? Like, I'm still going through this micro grief process, finding meaning in what does it mean to be the parent of, my youngest teenager. And at what point does that transition to being possibly a grandparent or even the parent that they move out? And I'm just using this as an analogy for you guys, but layer it into how your life looks, okay? And I'm going to restate this. Grief is not something that you just merely move on from. You don't move on from grief. It's embedded in your system forever, and how you manage it is really the key thing here. So if we're looking at grief as not something that you're moving on from, as loss is something you're not, like, you just don't deal with anymore, it's in the past, we don't have to think about it anymore. No, we learn how to walk with it. We learn how to walk with it. I loved being a parent, to a mother to my infant children. I loved it. But I'm not going to sit in that identity while they're toddler, while they're, a child, teenager, a grown adult. I'm not going to sit in that identity and just be like, oh, nope, I'm still the. And people do this like quite often. I mean, we have a whole society right now that does it. Like anybody that's like, okay, I'm just going to be really sassy and say the thing. But anybody that's had like a partner that behaved in a childish way. Like maybe men think of me as their mother, and I'm like, ew, I'm not your mom. Like take care of your issues. Like you got to grieve that and figure out how to walk with it. I'm not your mother. And maybe men even feel that, like, I'm not your dad. Like, you need to take care of your daddy issues. You need to take care of your mommy issues. Like, whatever it is, people will not face these grieving transitions. They don't know how to walk with it. And that's what I'm sharing with you today is that, the way that your parent treated you or didn't treat you. So there's neglect, there's, you guys can go back and I think it was called Father Wound or something like that. Back in March, I did a video on it. But it's learning how to, okay, my dad wasn't in my life and it caused these kind of attachment styles. How am I going to break away from those attachment styles, but still move through the process of one, letting go and forgiving, but also accepting what I learned in maybe not having a parent or having a parent that behaved in a certain way that caused me to have some sort of mental or psychological grief or even emotional numbness or dysregulation. So we learn to walk with grief. And that's where the rebirth and transition piece comes in. So now we're going to move into what to do while you walk. Okay? So a lot of people are like, they look at the grieving process and they're like, okay, here's the grieving process. Step one, step two, step three, step four, step five. I'm accepting it and now I'm letting it go. I'm not going to deal with it anymore. And it's a very linear process. But in my experience, grief is not linear. Time is not linear and grief is not linear. Grief is very much cyclical. I can't remember the name of the person who created what is called the swirl method, but the swirl method is it's all of those parts of the grieving process, but then it cycles it. It cycles it. So instead of like being in denial, you might be in denial one day and then maybe you sit in acceptance the next day, but then you move on to anger. And maybe you sit in anger for like a week or two, or even a month, or a year, like however long you sit in that anger. But then you might move on to bargaining. You might move back into denial. That, in my experience, that is how grief operates. And until you can embrace, it depends on how big it is. It could be a macro thing like losing your parent, losing your spouse, losing your child, or it could be a micro grief loss of identity shifting. Losing a job might be a little bit more than micro, but depends on the circumstances. But you're looking at these grief in all these different forms, and really what the swirl method and the cyclical nature of grief has taught me is that you go at your own pace. Don't try to rush through and then you're at the end. And I've done that before. I've tried to anyways. My grief would not let me do it. It was like, nope. You're going to experience these things until you walk with me as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Okay? Until you accept it and move on and accept that that part of you has died but is always there with you, that is the moving on of it. So slow your pace is the first part here. Slow your pace. Walking through the valley is not jogging, it's not running, it's not avoiding. It really is just walking at your own pace through whatever the grief is, micro or macro alike. Walk at your own pace. It's not a race. There is, in my experience, like I was like, oh my gosh, I just need to get over it and then I can go back to work. And I did. After my mom died, I was back to work 3 days after. And then I think a few weeks later, I was like, okay, I have to take time out for myself. And so I took a week off. Roadside walkers here. We're talking about such a serious thing. And yeah. So I went back to work because that was my way of avoiding the emotional burden or load of me, you know, being at my mother's deathbed and watching her die. Knowing that there was a certain era and a certain identity that I had that was going to not be there. I tried to race through it. I don't need anybody. I'm just going to hunker my head down and work, 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 work. What do you mean? Oh, we're talking about death. We're talking about death and the shadow of death. So I tried to race through it, but it didn't work. In fact, it took me about 10 months until I was able to cut my hair because I had finally said, okay, I accept it. And in my Native American belief system, the cutting of hair is done to signify the loss and the grief of a loved one. Can slow speak. So walking at your own pace. However, whatever the situation is, you be the better judgment of that, and then be vocal about your needs during that time. Okay? It's not a race. Now, your grief is going to come through in different ways. For me, I was listening, I couldn't stop listening just to somebody reading the Bible to me. So I went online and I, found a channel and I was like, that's all I want to hear. I don't want to talk to anybody, not interested in talking to anybody. All I want to do is listen to somebody speak the Bible. And I think I listened to somebody read the book of Psalms possibly 50 times. And that's a long freaking book. I'm not hearing your words. Are you unable to hear me? Mike? Mike? So grief may ask for silence. It may ask for music. It may ask for prayer. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mike. My executive producer, Mike. Your grief may ask for rage, that anger part of you, or it might ask for ritual. It might ask for ritual. So listen to what, as you're walking, listen to what your grief is saying to you. Okay? Just listen. Maybe you just need to be in silence and you just, I remember there were days that I was working that I had to shut my computer down, get into the car, and go drive around and scream. Whatever music, I think I was singing Pink Floyd a lot. It's death. Shadow of death. Now, as you're walking through this, you're going to want to be very present. That's why we walk and we don't run. We walk at our own pace. We grieve at our own pace. We want to be present in our body and listen to what it has to do, what it has to say to us. Now, literally walking is going to help you. Just like I said, in that moment of rage, I just went and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go drive around and just belt out, what album was it? Belt out Pink Floyd's, oh my gosh. I'm in it, you guys. The Final Cut album. That was my cathartic moment. It was just driving around, music blaring, and I'm screaming all of the words of the Pink Floyd Final Cut album. And that was my cathartic moment to really get out a lot of the anger, a lot of the feelings that I had that were sitting in my body, just and I was wrestling with it. It was a very deep wrestling moment of that. Movement also helps. So I would go on walks. I would just get up from work, or I'd get up and I just leave the house, go for a drive somewhere, and find a place to just sit in my feelings, and cry if I needed to. So you let your body lead. Now we're looking at how's our body moving? How are we, integrating through that? We walk, we can sway back and forth, maybe like holding our hands in certain areas. So, one of the nervous system regulation methods is to put your hand on your heart and put your other hand on your belly, where the emotions are, and just push down. You don't have to push down very hard, but just so that you feel that pressure, and breathe. I do this all the time. It's like my jam. Anytime I feel, you know, activated, and that I'm moving through some really difficult feelings, I go and I put my hand on my heart, my hand on my stomach, and I breathe as I move through this shadow of death, okay? Sobbing helps. So the tears are the sacred technology of releasing these emotions that we have. So the lie that was framed as younger people is stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Real men don't cry. Real men don't express emotion. Any other sayings that like sit embedded in your body that told you not to cry, do go and do that. Do it in private if you have to, but just get it out. The tears are a sacred technology that our bodies, our amazing bodies, have that will release those things. It's like it's expelling things. Like there's information in the tears because that water is a memory. So if you guys don't know about water, water is amazing. Water holds memory, and there are scientific studies that demonstrate this. So I'm not just speaking out of. Okay, let's see. Hello. I'm sorry, I got a phone call. Okay. Now, the body holds a lot of water. It's about 70%, I think, somewhere around there. There are research case studies where people talked to water and then they froze the water and they saw the crystallization. So when you talk positively to a plant, let's say, the water within that plant, the water that plant, if you talk into the water and you talk into it negatively versus if you talk into it positively, they did this study on it. The water that the researchers spoke negatively into, they watered the plant with that water, okay? And then the ones that they spoke positively into, they watered another plant with that water. What happened? The water that had the negative expressions into it, vocal expressions into it, the plant wilted, and I don't know if it died, but it definitely wilted. It wasn't looking very good. Versus the other plant that the water was spoken into positively, that plant flourished. There's there's a whole host of water experiments based on this. So if you think about it, as we're expelling our tears, as the tears come out and they have, there's also salt minerals in it. It's basically salt water that's expressing from your body. Those tears are sacred technology. They're letting go of parts of you that are grieving by expelling the things that you're done carrying. So sob, cry, do it in private if you have to. There you are, Tyler. I was wondering where you were. But keep your body as soft as possible. Now, how do you know when it's not soft? Well, you'll start to feel it. Like, feel it in your neck. You might feel it in other areas, in your hands, in your ankle, in your knee, in other areas of your body, your back. You'll start to feel it in your body. So keep it soft and really keep it moving. Like when you move around, it moves the water around within your body as well. Okay? And it helps to break away the fascia and the memories that are being stored in different areas of your body. And we can even go deeper into that, but maybe I'll save that for another day, where different areas of your body are showing you different things about what you're holding. So if it's on the left side, if it's on the right side, if it's your head, if it's your, you have a pain in your stomach, if you have a headache in a certain area, all of these pain points are telling your body, telling you something about something that you're holding that you're not releasing. Okay? Allegedly. Could it be? Not giving any medical advice here. The other thing is to speak to the dead or speak to whatever you've lost. Now that remember, this doesn't have to be a physical loss. This could be a symbolic loss. The physical loss, that's kind of an obvious thing. If you lose a loved one, or lose a friend, those kind of things. Lose a job, you could, there could be a lot of things stored in that. But then also, the loss of an identity, the loss of a belief system. These things are fundamentally building you, and so really kind of affirming what your identity is, what your loss is. And so one way to speak to them is to write a letter. So letters are actually really interesting, because you have this like personal physical connection with whatever it is. I'm writing a book right now, and I can't tell you how activating or stimulating it is, and then also how cathartic it is. So as I'm working through processing my own, it's not even my own grief, it's my experience of a whole collective's grief process that I'm it's a David and Goliath story, you guys, of what I'm doing. But I'm writing a book to like encompass all of the feelings, all of the abuse that we experience in our workplace culture. I'm addressing it, not just in America. This is on a worldwide scale. Whatever the reaches of the internet are, whatever the reaches of business are, like this is addressing that head on. And it is scary. I walk through the shadow of death with it, because as I go through the other side, who am I going to be when I'm reborn? I'm like grieving the loss of the survival me that stayed quiet, small. Can't wait to get an autographed copy. I am excited to deliver it. I think I might make an announcement tomorrow afternoon. But, as I'm like writing this book, it's cathartic. I'm speaking to dead identities of myself, of being a good employee, of being a model employee, of being a perfectionist employee, of doing all the things that they said, of taking on all of the burden of work, of giving them such creative and innovative ideas, of of believing in their mission and their purpose, and that they were doing it the best good intentions of whatever the business was. So I'm writing a book, but you can write these little letters, and it doesn't have to be anything like huge. It could be, a really short thing, I like maybe, if let's just keep with the parent and the infant, like maybe you're moving from being a new mother that's pregnant, that's terrified to give birth to the baby, and then you go through the shadow of death of now the baby is here and now I have to now I'm taking care of the baby. You can write a letter of, your pregnant self and the identity of what that meant, and just write it out. Like, I'm very fearful about the birth process. I'm uncertain, I'm scared, I'm excited, I'm thrilled to meet my baby. But that part of you that kind of died of not being a mother into being a mother, that can sometimes cause an identity shift. And this happens all the time, where after they give birth to the baby, then all of a sudden they're stuck in postpartum depression. They're having postpartum issues of, am I a good mother? Am I this? Am I that? And they just like kind of question themselves because they've gone through this really serious process, and raising a child or raising another human it can feel very scary. I remember being a new mother. I was 21. I was just a baby. So in your letter, as you're speaking to whatever you're moving through, whatever your you're alchemizing, whatever that is, just ask what it wants you to remember about that. Of remember being pregnant, remember that experience of, maybe meeting your husband and then having the baby. Ask what you want, what it wants you to remember about that, and then release that and say, you know what, I honor myself as, my former self, and now I'm going to embrace and claim this new identity that I've, been presented, and really honor that part of you. So you're not really like shying away from who you used to be. You're embracing that and honoring it, but then moving forward. It's a rite of passage. Okay? These are little mini rites of passage as we go through it. So, in speaking to that, I have to remember myself as I'm writing my book. I have to remember who I was as those employees, and honor the dysfunction, honor the toxic workplace culture that I was exposed to, honor who it built me into today. And I'm not angry, I'm not upset, I'm not calling anybody out, because people didn't know. People did not know what they were doing. It was unconscious. But now I'm going to be bringing that unconscious, unseen realm into the forefront, because I don't like people just complaining about the things and then filing the lawsuits and going through this whole horrendous thing. Like, it's unnecessary. I see it as unnecessary. Let's just own that we built this thing up to a certain point, honor it for what it is, and then move forward with a new, better solution of a well-being economy, of an economy where the workers are not just led into the toxic sludge mines that are the corporate cubicles or even the digital cubicles without wellness in mind. Okay? This is a big thing. It's a big idea. It's a big rebirth portion. And as a grief priestess, I'm moving us through it. We're going to get there. this is my divine mission. And this is a big macrocosm, but on these little, it's fractal. So you can still do this on these small microcosms as well. It's fractal. Whew. So as we keep these rituals that we do, so breathing, crying, walking, maybe taking up dance lessons, maybe you go hiking. I love hiking. Maybe, you go camping and you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna, throw it into the fire. I did that the last time I went camping. Is everything that I was ready to release, I wrote a little letter to it out and I said, I'm releasing this relationship that I have with this person. They served me and now it's no longer serving me. And I thank them with gratitude for showing me parts of myself that I didn't see. Writing it down, wrapping it up, putting a little tie on it, throwing it in the fire. And then sending that back up to the heavens, sending that back out, like moving it through my body and sending it out. Okay? So that's a ritual that you can do, but you can also light a candle, and you can do that daily. Just light a candle and talk about the things that you're wanting to release. Speaking it out to somebody you trust, or speaking it out loud is sometimes helpful, but just naming what it is can help transmute. So a lot of the times I'm stuck in these abstract thoughts, and it's like a firework is going on in my brain every single day. Of the more information that I'm exposed to, the more my brain is just firing off on all cylinders. It's almost overwhelming at times, and I could feel it just bunching in my body. And so I pull out my tuning forks and I do some sound healing, or I go on a walk and just walk and pretend that I'm on a book tour and I'm sharing my book with people, and I just say it out loud and walk as I'm doing it, getting it out there so that it's not just sitting in my system, that I'm actually moving through that grief process. So you can also speak into your water and ask it to help move out some of these big feelings that you're experiencing. You can ask the water to flush the things out. So it doesn't have to be you speaking it. It could be flushing it out in different ways. Sweating, doing cleanses, taking a bath. I took this really nice detox bath the other day. I was like, I feel like I can literally feel toxic stuff in my body right now. And I was like, I need to take a nice long soak. It's like 50 minutes. And it was Epsom magnesium flakes or Epsom salt flakes. It was baking soda, apple cider vinegar, and a little bit of bentonite clay. I threw that all in a bath, and I sat in that bath, and I spoke into the bath the things that I was moving through, because the water is, it's a symbiotic thing, and then it flushes down the drain. Take it away, take it out of me and flush it out. Because right now it's a very big energy that I'm working with. And then cry, like the ritual of tears is very helpful. Like I cried earlier this morning. I probably don't look the most radiant, but I had to get some really deep truths out of the shadow of death that I'm walking in. And it's okay to do that. And if you have to do it in silence, do it in silence. If you want somebody to hear you, like seek somebody out that you trust, that you can just be really, truly honest with them. My girlfriends call me. I call my girlfriends all the time when the tears are almost unbearable and I just need to say the thing to somebody else so that they hear me. Now, the last thing is to continue walking with death, with the shadow of death. Continue walking. Okay? You don't want to build a home in it, because then you're just surrounded by the shadow of death. You want to learn the codes of what is being brought into you at the time. So don't pitch a tent. Don't put a sleep down. Don't build a home there. This is a rite of passage. It's not a place to build yourself in. Okay? It's not an identity. It's not a victim status to wear as a badge and share with people. This is how horrible my life is. I share the truth about the experiences that I've had in grieving my mother, grieving my father, grieving the loss of loved ones, grieving the loss of, an old identity where I was the child of the matriarch into now I am the matriarch. And like repositioning, who am I the matriarch of? Who am I the matriarch of? So grief is not my identity. Like I have a whole thing that out of the grief that I've experienced that I'm rebirthing. I have a big mission here. And as I said, like your mission, it may not be as large as mine, and that's okay. Like we need you too. We need everybody to be not sitting in the shadow of death and building a home there. We need people walking through it. Because there's a lot of shitty things that are going on in our world. And it's because of the silence and the censorship and the inaction of your expression, of your voice and your acceptance of walking with whatever grief is sitting in you, whatever that is. If you're not processing it and you're not walking with it and you're not embracing and embodying the new identity, the new blessing that came out of that, even if it's difficult and you're sitting in a victim mindset of it, you're not going to do anybody any good sitting in victim mindsets. We want to keep on walking. This is a passage. And sometimes it's just a really long valley, or it can feel that way. But it's not until you start walking through it that you start to learn the landscape, that things become familiar to you. Then you can identify it a lot easier. And then you can move through it. And then identify it again and move through the other thing. And pretty soon you're able to just quickly transmute these things. Even while you're still walking, you can still continue like going through that valley. Archetypal stories that really speak into like this walking through the valley. I did a podcast on it, but Inanna, so Queen Inanna, she was Queen of Heaven, and she chose to walk into the underworld. And I feel that deeply. There's a lot of things that I was holding on as power and authority that I've had to like shed and get rid of. It's a very humbling and vulnerable journey to be able to go into the underworld like I have. And I'm not the only one, but I'm just speaking from my own experience. Descending into the underworld, really dealing with the stress, the trauma, the toxic work culture, the unconscious connection that we have to technology. Like all of these things are overwhelming, and it might overwhelm somebody that's looking, and we see it all the time. People all the time are like, it's inevitable, AI is going to take over. It's inevitable. There's nothing that we can do to change the corporate, like the mega corporation structure. The rich are bad. That's all victim mindset talk. If you don't realize your own inner power of just having one voice, one stone to take down a giant, a Katniss Everdeen that took down President Snow and just transitioned and changed life forever for all of the 12 districts. Erin Brockovich, who, when she discovered that there were toxins being introduced into the water supply in Hinckley, I think it was Hinckley, California, she wasn't a lawyer, she wasn't an investigator, she didn't have all these things after the end of her name. But what she had was compassion. What she had was the receipts. And what she did is deliver those receipts with her voice through activism, with her voice. And yeah, she did it in high heels. But sometimes you just got to put the high heels on and go and say the thing, even if it's alone. There's that one motivational poster that's like, it's this like shadow character. Well, they're all like a circle for a head, and I don't know, it's not really, it's like the embodiment of a body if it was like in geometric shapes. But it's the one person, they have a shadow, and then it's like a whole crowd of people that they're talking to. It's scary to do that. But it's also necessary, because silence is inner violence. Censorship is running away. And we need the vocal expressions. And to honor other people's vocal expressions too. And just, I hear you. I'm regulated in myself. I don't necessarily agree with your position, but I hear what you're saying. So the Queen of Heaven descended into the underworld, and as she's moving through each of these areas, she's stripping off a piece of power, her robe, her garments, her crown, her scepter, all these things. She's laying all those things down, and then gets hung on a hook. And boy, I can feel that. This must be what Jesus felt in the Garden of Gethsemane. Is knowing that you're going to be put on a cross, knowing that you're going to go into the underworld and be put on this hook. But what happens in that? So Inanna, when she returns, she's reborn in power, compassion, and wisdom, because she learned something by laying it all down, by killing the ego, whatever that was before she became the Queen of Heaven. Jesus laid down his life to save his sheep. The shepherd laid down his life to protect even one sheep, I think is how it goes. He was sweating blood in anguish, knowing the crucifixion, knowing that for 3 days he was going to be in a tomb. But he stayed in the garden. He didn't run away from his mission and his calling. He really walked through death in that. He walked through death, literally and figuratively. Like, we can look at this. This is a fractal story that is embedded in our systems. We know that there's a truth in it. Persephone, she was abducted into the underworld, but she became the queen of the underworld. Yes, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Conquering death. You don't have to wait for your actual death to be reborn and alive. I think that's the other thing I just want to illustrate. You don't have to wait for death of your physical body. You can be reborn today. And the lies that the religious institutions have said of, be saved or be doomed to eternal damnation. Like, don't let fear enter your body. Those men were fearful in saying that. The women were fearful in sharing that message. Yeah, there's a little truth to it, but they perverted what death is. They perverted the shadow of death. Perverted might be not the right word. Let's say subverted. And they were unconscious of it. So we can say, you know what? You told me if my soul is not saved, I was going to hell. But I just don't believe that anymore. Jesus conquered death by going to that cross. And in that moment, in his sacrifice, death was conquered. How does it go? He hurt the head, and then the serpent hurt the heel, or something like that. Conquered it. You don't have to wait to die to be saved. You can be raptured today. And hallelujah if you do. It feels great. It feels good to be enraptured and loved and cared for, and know that angels and wisdom and Jesus and the whole host of heaven are behind your back. That's what his rod and his staff will comfort me. And then also, he feeds me, he gives me a big table of things to eat from in the presence of my enemies. So Persephone, she was abducted into death, and then and then becomes queen of the underworld. Okay, this shows how grief can transform you into a guide. So now she's able to go into the underworld and then into the heavens as a queen. She comes back every year, right? Question: what led you to believe that you won't go to heck if you don't follow the commandments? So when you are enraptured and you're going into heaven already, like in your living body, if you believe that Jesus conquered death, if you believe the gospel where when he died, the temple was rent in two, the man-made temple was rent in two, like all of the Old Testament was fulfilled at that time. As a Christian, if you believe in Christianity and the story there, like that is the story. And it doesn't mean that, you go out once you're regulated and you know that you're cared for. Let's talk from it from a scientific perspective. This is what gives my position credence. Like, I don't need to have certifications. I don't need to have all these letters after my name. What gives me credence is knowing that as I regulate my body, as I tell myself, you're safe, you're protected, God has got your back, you're on a mission for him, and go boldly and do it. I'm not sitting here saying, I'm not sitting here and outwardly lying, because in a regulated system, I'm like so connected to myself, I'm present in myself, but then I'm so connected to the divine order, and I'm hearing all of the unseen realm messages that are coming through, and I'm so connected to it that I know that I'm just in the iceberg moment of it. And the further that I go and let go and detach my ego from my own personal life into what my mission here is, that I'm going to be cared for. That certainty, the Psalms 23, when I'm walking through that, like I know that I'm chosen. I know that I'm destined for a better place. I can feel it in my body. My mind is just, like I told you, it's a firework. My mind is popping off. It doesn't mean don't follow the commandments. Jesus came, and he said, the greatest commandment is what? To love yourself as you would love another. To love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Right? That's the greatest commandment, is to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Now, if you're self-abandoning and you're not loving yourself, then how are you treating your neighbors? Not good. That comes from a place of dysregulation. If you're not loving yourself, that's dysregulation. That's nervous system dysregulation. Our nervous systems, allegedly, are the Wi-Fi systems that connect us to one another, connect us to the divine, connect us to the unseen realms, connect us to our dream metaverse. Like, our systems are amazing. Our bodies are intelligently designed. I don't care what anybody says. Evolution doesn't sit well in my system. Because in my system, I know that I was made in the image of God. And that image is not just my physical body, but my mental state and the things that I can access from my mental state. It's my emotional state and the things that I feel from that emotional state. And then it's also my spiritual body of being connected to the divine and being able to bring brilliant broadcasts to you guys. The greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. But if you're not loving yourself, that's dysregulation. You can't love your neighbor if you're dysregulated. Our final archetypal story. Hopefully that answers your question, Mike. My executive producer, Mike, you guys. So Mary Magdalene is the last archetypal story that we're going to go through. And she was at the tomb and she did not run away. She faced the shadow of death. She stayed at the cross. She stayed at the tomb. And you know what? She was the first person that got to witness the resurrection of Jesus. She was the first person. The grief that she had experienced, the shadow of death that she experienced, opened her spiritual eyes, where she got to be the first witness of the resurrection. It's beautiful, right? All right, now let's really integrate this, and then it's been 88 minutes. I can go on, but I have a book to write, you guys. Okay, so as we're integrating and we're looking at this, we're looking at the walking through the valley. Now, if you're walking through the valley, just know that you're not lost. It may feel like you're lost. You may feel all different kinds of feelings, but really know that you're not lost. What is going on is you're being initiated. Okay? It is an initiation. So physical things that you can do is, put your face in ice water. That's the fastest way if you're panic attack, if you're really worried, if you're having high anxiety. Cold plunge or plunge your face. Your face has a ton of different nerve endings. Your brain is a part of your nervous system, and then it goes down your spine. And so there's a lot of nerve endings in your face that if you submerge your face in a bowl of ice water, that will be the fastest way to get your system to stop like panicking and stop dysregulating. Really what dysregulation is that you sense a fear. So you're basically like a doe in the headlights, or a doe that hears a sound when they're eating and they just freeze and look around and try to detect, am I in danger? So when you're in dysregulated state, your nervous system is dysregulated, meaning that you're in a sympathetic state, nervous system state, and your nervous system is telling you that there's things to fear until you get out of that state. It's a temporary, it should be in a temporary state. Until you get out of that state, you're going to feel a little bit lost. You're going to be scanning the environment for threats. And just know that this is an initiation. So if it's real or perceived, you can still feel these survival mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Like those four mechanisms will start to kick on. So what happens scientifically is in the back of the brain, we have a thing called an amygdala. And there's been studies that prove this. There's an inverse relationship. So the amygdala sits here in the back of your head. It's a little, two little almond-shaped bitties, maybe even the size of almonds. It's not very big, but those get activated when you're in stress response, when you're in survival mode and you're trying to detect where is the threat, where is the threat. Now, inversely, you have your prefrontal cortex, which is right here. So you can see, like, if the amygdala is right here and the prefrontal cortex is right here, one is below the other. So you can really just kind of remember that of being the higher mind. So when the amygdala is working, there is a guy that wrote a book on emotional intelligence that called it an amygdala hijack, meaning that you're in a constant state of assessing the threat, assessing the threat. But if you're not in, if you're in that, your prefrontal cortex is basically impaired or shut down, low battery mode. Okay. Now the prefrontal cortex, what it does is that is the space for reasoning, critical thinking. It's the space for executive functions like decision making. So if that is impaired, you literally, like your amygdala is on, you literally cannot process any new information because your body is in threat mode. It's in survival mode. And so, like regulating your body by walking, sobbing, doing a cold plunge, taking a cold shower, putting your face in ice water, breathing. So you'll notice that if you're like if you think about it, let's think about it like a movie. So in the movies, like let's say in Jurassic Park when the kids are running through and they're being chased by the velociraptors. So they're moving and they go into the kitchen and they're like trying to hide and they're trying to like stop their breathing because that's a survival mechanism. So if your breath is shallow, your body is immediately thinking, oh, it's shallow because we're in threat mode. And it can unconsciously go to that space. So taking a deep breath and filling all of your lungs, all of your stomach with a breath, that technique works because it, I don't want to say is tricking it, but it is showing your body that we're not in threat mode. It's okay to take the deep breath. It's okay to be heard. It's okay to be seen. So, and that's when that prefrontal cortex kicks on. So now with a deep breath, you're actually giving you're opening up. You're turning the amygdala off and then turning that on. So the inverse relationship, think about it as the prefrontal cortex is on or the amygdala is on. And it's the circuitry. So they've demonstrated in scientific studies that the inverse relationship is true. They've done it in animals and also in people because they're able to map out the brain. So if you're dysregulated and you're feeling lost in whatever the thing that you're dealing with as far as grief, just know that you can be initiated, but there are things that you can do to kind of help soothe your system and get back into that relaxed state. I also want to close with you're not broken. When you're dealing with grief, it's not because you're broken. When you're dealing with grief, it's because part of your identity is being emptied. The tears are emptying out of you. By walking, the sweat is emptying out of you. But you're being emptied. Okay? As your grief priestess, and what I'm truly reminding you of here is that Death does not get your final word, okay? Death does not get your final word. Death is does not mean that everything is ended, all right? The death of something is a cyclical signal of rebirth, and we see that every winter to spring, that rebirth cycle. Something new is being born out of what you've lost. And your best bet of seeing what that rebirth is and being really clear on whatever the purpose, whatever the reasoning is behind that, is is the only way through that. And until you get your system regulated, you're not going to be able to see what it is, because you're going to be assessing more threats. So then fear stacks on fear stacks on fear stacks on fear. Now let's look at this from a workplace scenario. I've been writing about this today, so it's very relevant. I've talked about my burnout process. So a few years ago, I was working for a company, and I'd been there for quite some time. And I was working for the company, and I was going through a huge life change. So I was preparing to sell my house. I was preparing to leave my job, even though I kind of was like, oh, should I or shouldn't I? I left my relationship of almost 10 years. I was dealing with some wolves at the door, okay? A tornado, ready to suck me into its vortex. I remember going to work one day, and my boss says, you can't work overtime anymore. We don't have the finances to do that. You have to work the 40-hour. I was an hourly employee at the time. You have to work 40 hours. Also, these other things that I've taken on for you, I'm giving those back to you. And so you figure out how to do that. Now, already I was working 50 some odd hours a week and barely getting through with that. Like, there was very little labor hours. So you can imagine where this is leading. I get to work one day, and I do all the morning ritual of getting my coffee, getting set up, getting my water, getting all the things, putting my lunch away, my snacks out. And I sit down in my chair, I can visually remember it right now, and I look at the screen, and my mind is like, come on, Emily, you know how to do this. And my body was like, we can't even lift our arms to put our fingers to the keyboard right now. My body literally shut down. Okay? So what happens is eventually I just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to do the important things. I'm going to let the other things slide. So things that people want me to do, I'm just going to pick and choose the ones that I'm going to do, the simplest path forward. And how does my manager respond? I know that you are capable of taking this on. I know that you're smart enough to figure out how to get through it and to figure out some sort of way to make it happen. And when I was like, okay, when I couldn't deliver, I got a performance improvement plan put into place. All the meanwhile, like, my tank is empty. I have nothing. So I wasn't listening to, like, I don't blame my manager for doing that. I don't blame HR for agreeing with that. They always try to get someone into doing stuff. Yeah. I don't blame any of them. Even though their initial reaction is, there's something wrong with you, not with our system. There's something wrong with you, not the number of hours that we're allowing in our department and the lack of support in the department. It's not it's not us, it's you kind of mentality. I don't blame them for that. In fact, that taught me so much about things that I had to let go. And I can tell you right now that anybody who heard that story is going to resonate with the things that I just said. Most everybody in corporate culture has experienced this. Go onto TikTok and look up toxic workplace, toxic culture, toxic whatever, hostile work environment, gaslighting, burnout, you name it, the things that you experience, quiet quitting. Like, the workplace is a toxic place. And the thing that I just described is happening on a massive scale. What does that mean though? It means that when somebody quiet quits, somebody else comes into that place and then they're run down until they're empty. Then the next person, they're run down unless they have self-respect and they're like, I'm not doing this. You guys figure out a different way. I need more support. If you're able to say that, great. A lot of people are not there. They feel that if they speak up, they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their livelihood, all of the things that they have, they're going to lose it all. Okay, that's loss. That's not walking through the shadow of death. Walking through the shadow of death is speaking up in that moment and saying, you know what? I really enjoy working here, but the way that I'm being treated and the number of tasks that I have compared to the number of hours that I have is overwhelming. I'm burdened. How can you fix this? What do you think? We don't have people regulated enough to speak that truth to power. Okay? That's why I'm here. I'm here for you. The people that do that, oh my god, man, they're getting lots of likes on TikTok. They're getting lots of likes on wherever. Um, so I wasn't broken. Okay, I knew that I was very skilled. I had the technical skills. I had the mental skills. I had all of this going for me. But I wasn't broken. I was just empty. Okay? And that's why I share that story is that burnout was just an emptiness. It was the grind of this toxic workplace culture. So remember so obviously I put my resignation in if you guys wanted to know. I put my resignation in, I sold my house and I traveled to like figure out how can I feel again? How can I relieve the anxiety? How can I get rid of this? And it took me a couple years. It was a while. I had a lot to work through. But death did not get the final word because now here I am still honoring that part of me, honoring that job. I'm handling it with so much grace and perspective that it is, even though I can say, man, I've been a victim of burnout. That really sucked. F that place. F the managers. Like really handling it gracefully is I see why they did the things in the way that they did. The manager that I had wasn't trained properly in how to manage that situation. The human resources personnel were not, they did not have the information to manage me as an employee. They didn't have the knowledge to do that. And so I forgive them. And I'm not attached to that, but it still is a piece of me that I am going to walk through into my future holding in this loving care of that version of me that had to go through that. It was a part of my initiation. And the fact that you're laughing at it, Mike, just goes to show like how deep the trauma is. We used to joke and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." But we used to joke of like, "Oh yeah, we're all trauma bonded together." You know, I don't want to leave my job because I'm bonded with these people through shared trauma of the workplace. And if you guys have said that, then you know what I'm speaking into is huge. So we're getting through it. That's what the grief priestess is reminding you of today. And then our final reflection is, what are you grieving or have not grieved that you have not honored? So I shared, a really deeply, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually painful moment of my life of experience that in that job, but I also demonstrated to you how I honor it. I'm honoring it. That was a piece of me that taught me so much about myself. It taught me so much about other people and how they're being affected by it. Okay? So I wore that burden. I wore that grief for a reason. And now I'm honoring it. I'm grateful for it, in fact. And another reflection you can do is, what version of you is dying right now in this moment? What are you maybe even on a micro fractal level grieving that you're holding on to and kind of sitting in the shadow of death with it? What are you holding on to? But even more importantly, like, what is on the other side of that? If you're able to walk with it, honor it, and, just embed it into who you are or who you were and carry that, what is on the other side of that rebirth? During the pandemic, so many people lost their jobs because they were like, I'm not complying with whatever mandate they had to comply with. Let's say the mask mandate. I refuse to comply with a mask mandate. Okay, well, if you don't wear the mask, fear tactic. If you don't wear the mask, then you lose the job. Okay? And a lot of people were like, I don't want to lose my job. I'm going to give up my sovereignty and be coerced into complying with this mandate. Tons of people did it. Tons of people did it. I don't want to have to deal with the rising up. I'm going to silence myself. I'm censoring myself. But there were a few people that just refused. And in that, they lost their jobs. Okay? I know tons of people that did that. What happened to them? They honored that. They were like, I am just not going to do that. They quit their jobs. And then behind that, a new opportunity arose for them that honored their sovereign decision of not consenting to that policy or that mandate. And then they got jobs that honored that, and they made more money. I heard multiple reports of that happening. So what are you holding on to? Okay? What are you holding on to? What version of you is dying right now that you're holding on to? That if you processed it, if you walked with it through that valley of the shadow of death, what would be on the other side of that? Are you holding back from that rebirth? Okay. All right. That concludes my broadcast. They haven't called me, so I was able to make it through. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I am so excited. Next week, I am launching my book. My book is called The $8 Truth, Exposing a $380 billion lie. The $8 Truth, Exposing the $380 billion lie. That launches next week, 8/12/2025, on Tuesday, and that will be through my website, Celestic Intelligence. It'll be purchasable on my website. So I get to self-publish, which is amazing. And I am going to call to action that if you are watching this and you're inspired by what the heck is she talking about, you'll start to hear a lot more information about it. It will be purchasable through soulisticintelligence.com, so you'll start to see some more stuff come through for that. And this is designed not just for leaders, this is designed for the people. So if you guys have been following me in the Digital Age series, know that I am taking the blueprint from the industrial age and I am applying it to the digital age. Okay, so in the industrial age, there was all this expansion and all of this building, railroads, mining, big dreams, big things, towns, cities, everything was going up, skyscrapers. It was just blowing up, okay, in the late 1880s. We can kind of see that in our digital space right now. But what happened in the industrial space? In that industrial age, people started rising up, getting unions together, and demanding fair wage, fair hours, and fair treatment in the workplace because the feminine always rises. So that feminine voice was rising in that time, and this is this is the modern, this is the digital union, I guess, that I am bringing forward to you guys. This is going to be a grassroots campaign to share with people. I made it $8 so that it's accessible to everybody. Yes, there is a little numerological gematria or whatever you want to call it around it. $8 is a karmic number. It's the sign of infinity. It's rising up. It's the declaration of kind of a changing empire, a changing culture. And so it's reasonably priced. I think most people can afford $8. And I want this to go viral. So the call to action is to share this with everybody that you know. And so I'm very, very excited to be the one to hold this and to speak it and to really, with the vision and goal in mind of ending toxic workplace culture. So you guys are at the forefront of this. Another great one. Thank you. And I hope you get better news. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, in the meanwhile, um, just be ready for that. So I hope you guys got a lot out of this. And if you've made it this far and you're watching a replay, put some information in the comments and, speak into this. Your voice is being heard, and I love to hear you guys talk about stuff. So, all right. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I have got to get back to work and also, take care of some regular, normal, everyday ritual stuff like eating. All right. Take care, guys. Bye.